Well, the most sensational news that have gripped Guyana is the indictment that has been laid against Azruddin Mohamed and Nazar Mohammed. The details of that 11-count indictment are very much in the public domain, and there is no need, therefore, for me to regurgitate those details on this program. No one ought to be surprised that these indictments were laid. They were long in the pipeline. The OFAC sanctions sent the first signal, but internally work was ongoing. The next step is for the government of the United States of America to request of the government of Guyana the extradition of the two persons who are in Guyana and who are the subject of the indictment. This process, which will be embarked upon, is a legal one, and it's contained in an extradition framework between the government of the United States and the government of Guyana, or rather, the state of the United States and the sovereign Republic of Guyana. The framework is captured in two main instruments: a treaty which dates back to 1924 between the United Kingdom and the United States, and a piece of legislation known as the Fugitive Offenders Act, which was amended as recently as 2024. Extradition between Guyana, now Guyana, and the United States is not of recent vintage. As I said, it dates back to over a century ago, long before the nation state of Guyana was born. When we were a colony of the United Kingdom, it existed in the form of the Fugitive Offenders Act of 1881. It was an applied act of the United Kingdom's Parliament that applied directly to Guyana because we were a colony of Great Britain. And that's how the colonial legal system worked. And then it was enhanced by a treaty executed between Great Britain and the United States of America in 1924. That's almost exactly 100 years ago. So you have a 1881 legislation and a 1924 treaty. So you're speaking about 150 years of extradition relationship between what is now Guyana and the United States of America. I say that because I see all manner of misinformation and misleading information being published in the press, and I will try to address some of those issues as we proceed. In its current construct, the process as I said earlier, begins with a request from the government of the United States to the government of Guyana for the extradition of the persons who are within the territorial jurisdiction of Guyana to the U.S. Once that request is made, a process which is outlined in the Fugitive Offenders Act is triggered, and a series of legal steps have to be followed, all of which are outlined in the legislation. The types of offenses for which extradition exists are contained in the treaty dating back to 1924. So as I said, this is not a new process. And Guyana, as an independent country, would have done dozens of extraditions to the United States and dozens to other countries as well. Just this year, we did one to the US and one to Canada as a result of requests made by the government of the US and the government of Canada. So we did two in the year 2025. And we have, I think, two ongoing right now in relation to other territories. So there is nothing new or novel about extradition and extradition processes. Both that we did this year, the subjects, they went to Canada and they went to the US, as far as I recall, the subjects consented to the extradition. So we didn't have any long process in the court. And these were not high-profile persons, so the public would not have been aware. There was no publicity of these extradition requests and consequent processes that ensued, which resulted in the successful extradition of the subject persons to the requesting states, in this case Canada, in the two cases I'm referring to, Canada and the US. In Guyana's independent history at least, I know of no request for extradition that has been refused by any government of Guyana. As I said, we have a long history of cooperating with the US on these matters. And the relationship is one based upon mutuality and reciprocity. In other words, the US also has a long history in cooperating with Guyana on matters of mutual criminal assistance and extradition. So it is a relationship that has evolved and has matured and is quite harmonious and diligent and efficient, and has so developed over the years. Guyana has made it very clear that it is ready, willing, and the most able to diligently discharge its legal duties and obligations under the current extradition framework that exists with the United States of America in relation to this matter. And we remain committed to that course. At this point in time, we are awaiting the request. Once the request is received, then the requisite legal process will unfold in accordance with the procedure set out in the law. Against that backdrop, and in those circumstances, it is obviously nonsensical for anyone to contend that these processes or this process is being motivated by some political agenda, is inspired by some political incentive, or is in any manner whatsoever tainted by politics or some other irrelevant consideration. All of you, or most of you, would have read the particulars detailed in the indictment in relation to the 11 counts that are alleged against the two subject persons. And you would quickly realize that they span a period that goes back to 2007. What that means is that this process commenced long before the PPP got into office. In fact, it spanned two governments of Guyana and two governments of the United States. Different governments of the United States and different governments of Guyana. I think the last